Hey there, JP, guess what? We have the old set back. Turns out I liked doing it this way, so the old bookshelf, display case, wall was actually surprisingly close. I didn't realize how close it was. I thought it was actually closer. Okay, so this is the second part of my second part video of how to build a LARP character. In the last video, I discussed some of the basic ideas behind character builds and how you want to approach that based on your playing style. So today's video, I'm going to break down a little bit more of the character build idea, and we're going to discuss some of the concepts behind character archetypes, character classes, and just kind of the small nuances behind that. Now, many people who are familiar with the basic RPG class system will kind of already have an idea of what these archetypes generally mean. Now, there are a couple of smaller nuances that will affect it in a LARP environment because turns out things work differently than they do in video games as they do in real life. Surprise. But to start, we're going to break it down to your three basic character archetypes. We have the tank, we have the rogue, and we have the caster. Now, just a quick aside note here. A lot of the non-combat production type characters I'm going to save for a completely different video because trying to explain that is a very complex thing because it's so different between every sort of LARP. Some LARPs have it, some LARPs don't. So until I can figure out a way to concisely explain that well, gonna do it in a different video. It gets a little complicated and there's just a lot of different answers to it. So back to our primary class types. You've got tank, you've got rogue, you've got caster. Those who like to focus on bashing things with the weapon and just hammering home the point, you're gonna want to go with the tank build. Those who prefer a little bit more skirmish work, a little bit more loose-fitting combat style and tactics, are gonna want to sit more in the rogue category. This is also where your ranged combat characters are going to more often than not find themselves. And finally, pretty much everyone who does magic is a caster. With the tank build, I found there are two different build concepts behind it. You have offensive, you have defensive. And it's very much as the name implies. With offensive, you're going to want to mete out as much abuse as you can. Get those numbers nice and high for what you're swinging if your combat system uses a number-based system. You'll also want to take some skills and stuff that'll assist in the damage output you deal, as well as making sure that you are the one dealing the damage, not receiving the damage. Defensive requires a surprising amount of dedication as well as tactics. With defense, your main purpose is to be the wall between enemies and your vulnerable allies. This can be healers, this can be ranged casters, this can be even ranged combat characters. Your main purpose is to keep your enemy where they need to be, which is in front of you. If defensive, you want to focus on a lot of defensive capabilities, you're also going to want to focus on having lots of armor. I'm not saying you won't be doing any damage, I'm just saying it's not tremendously likely. Which actually brings us to the next point. You may be thinking to yourself, well, why can't it just be both? Why can't it be an offensive and defensive tank build character? Now, I've seen this done a couple of times. I've tried it once myself. It's pretty difficult to pull off well. The problem is that in a video game environment, it's really easy to have an offensive and defensive built combat character because of how timing and gameplay mechanics typically work. In a LARP scenario, if you're mostly focusing on attacking, you're going to be using your sword arm predominantly to be attacking the enemy. You know, you're not going to do damage without attacking them. If you're focusing on defensive, you're probably going to be using that same sword arm to block a lot of additional hits, even if you have a shield. If they can get a shield to block one way, your other side is open, which is what you want to use your sword for. Trying to do both at the same time is difficult, and this is a really good way to actually work with teammates to have a system going. Get a buddies. It's a buddy system. Buddy system is good. Next, we're going to move on to rogue types. Now, this comes in two different flavors. You've got DPS and you've got griefers. Now, for those of you who don't speak internet, DPS is damage per second. As it implies, your focus is to do as much damage as quickly as possible. This is slightly different than an offensive tank build because it usually revolves around more skirmish work, more flanking work. Your job is going to be trying to get around behind enemies to catch them off guard. This means you have to be a lot quicker on your feet, and you're going to want to focus more on evading attacks instead of taking them. Because running in heavy armor, while I've seen it done for a shocking amount of time, is not something most people can do for an extended period of time. In all actuality, you're going to want to think like Sonic on this one. Gotta go fast. Now, griefers is a term I prefer to use, but I'm sure people who fall into this category aren't so fond of the term. They probably have different ways to describe it, but I use the term griefers because that's basically what they're doing. Their job is to grief the enemy. You want to disrupt and disorient your opponents. You want to run in there, knock a few people around, get a few debuff skills off, and then get out again. Speaking of experience, I've enjoyed playing this role in the past. It's a lot of fun. It's high risk, but if you manage to get in there and get a good grief run off, you can disrupt an entire enemy formation, which can give your front line time to break through and scatter their forces, which just feels awesome. That being said, you could also run in there and just get mooked right out of the gate. So it kind of goes either way. Now, this is where I'm going to put a side note here about archers and other similar ranged combat characters. They are one of the few occasions where you'll see a character fall under both of the different type of subcategories, as it were. They're both DPS as well as griefers, and which way they lean towards depends largely on playstyle. In the LARP, I'm mostly accustomed to playing in arrows ignore armor, so having a couple archers raining arrows down on your opponents can be a huge issue for the frontline fighters. This will usually draw attention towards them from your enemy skirmish fighters and magic spellcasters. They'll focus their efforts to bring those characters down, because if your frontline falls, the whole thing kind of falls a little bit apart, you get what I'm saying? And because of that, you're going to be both doing a lot of damage and drawing a lot of attention to yourself and away from the front line. So it's kind of that mix between DPS and griefer. Again, where you fall more so is going to depend largely on playstyle. And finally, we have casters. This is a great blanket term that refers to everyone who is casting magic. Magic usually falls under three primary categories, I find. You've got damage casters, you've got healing casters, and you have buff-debuff casters. There doesn't really need to be a whole lot of explanation put into this one, I find. As soon as I say what the kind of category of magic is, you've probably got an image in your head of what that all entails. Now, magic is one of the few things that varies so wildly from LARP to LARP, from chapter to chapter, from game to game. So if you want to play a spellcaster, really make sure you're on top of those rules, because magic is one of the more difficult things to get right, and trying to figure out what you want to do specifically will depend largely on what sort of environment you're going into, and I can't possibly outline all of the scenarios for that, because I don't want this video to be 8 minutes long, if I can help it. Hopefully you'll find some of these guidelines helpful for laying out what sort of character you want to play. If you have any questions, feel free to leave it in comments below. I'll answer what I can. If there's enough interest, I might do a more in-depth episode on each of these character archetypes. And as always, if you liked the video, be sure to leave a big old thumbs up. If you didn't like it, a big old thumbs down works too. Be sure to check on Tuesdays when I upload, Fridays when Sarah uploads, I just stabbed myself with a pen, and gaming on Sundays. And until the next video, TTFN, ta-ta for now.